Well, hey, everybody. My name is Chris Allen, and I am your host of the Always About People show. It's so good to have you back, re- regardless of what time zone you're watching us in or when you're actually watching this, even if you're watching a recording. We're glad that you're joining with us today. We've got a really important topic to cover today based on some feedback from previous topics and what I'm hearing in a lot of the businesses that I'm working with. This topic of remote work is a big deal. We want to talk about this idea of keeping culture remotely because it seems to be on everybody's mind. How can we keep culture when everybody's remote? Is this remote thing really here to stay? When are we going to get back to normal? We've heard a ton of these questions, and we're going to try to address them here today. Not just address them in terms of theory, but actually get really practical about some things that you can do. And I'm really excited about the guest that'll be joining me for this conversation. Chuck Cooper has become a great friend of mine in this space. He is the founder of Whitewater Consulting, where he really comes alongside businesses, small, mid-sized businesses, helping them to give clarity and peace of mind by providing great HR solutions. Now, his work goes beyond just providing HR solutions because he's a thought leader in this space as well. And I'm excited to just have this conversation with him. Just so you know, Chuck and I have conversations like this pretty regularly. And most of the time we don't include or allow other people to just listen in. So I hope that we can create a comfortable environment for you to just listen in and join this conversation. Would you help me welcome my good friend, Chuck Cooper?
Good afternoon, Chris. It's great to be with you this afternoon.
Oh, man, it's so good to have you. We're trying to create these new virtual environments, and I feel like I'm in an office right next to you, but it sure is good to see you.
It's good to see you. I'm certainly looking forward to our conversation. I think it's a great topic, and it's certainly one, as you know, it certainly is a top of mind for a lot of business owners and leadership that we talk with.
Yeah. Now, Chuck, I know that you have been in this space for a while. Maybe give our viewers some background on you, yourself, and how long you've been in this space. Because I think the question that I would be asking is, hey, what makes Chuck Cooper an expert in this space?
That is a great question. So, to start with, I am what I would call a recovering entrepreneur. I have been involved in 6 different companies at the ownership level, and it's ranged anywhere from industries that pertain to agriculture to hospitality and food service, ultimately now to HR. So, it's been a really interesting ride over the last 25 to 30 years. My wife and I and our family moved to Charlotte in 99, and I spent probably the next 15 years really working specifically with small and mid-sized companies, helping them really define and design HR solutions for their small business. And so that's really has given me, a lot of experience to really kind of come alongside and help to serve and to support, our clients over the years. And so I think when I look back over, my lifetime, there's been a couple of moments, Chris, where it has really given me some insight that's really helped prepare me for the position that I'm in today. And that is, when I think back, one of my greatest failures that I had was whenever I owned a business. We had a very, very successful operation, and I didn't have mentors or really accountability partners around me. So nobody was there to really serve as guardrails. And what that really allowed to happen was really for pride and ego to come in that situation to really cause, some really poor decisions to be made at the leadership level. So what I tried to do now is really use my experience and the mistakes that I made in some situations as a way to help prepare and to guide my clients so that they don't make those same mistakes.
Yeah. So I know that we've used this term HR solutions, and my gut tells me that as soon as people hear that, they're like, "Oh, great! Like we're going to talk about HR solutions, HRIS systems, and all like great. I've got benefits and payroll." But Chuck, I think that the thing that's most important to me, and the reason that we started this show was we want to talk about people. And so I know that your heart is for people. and that HR solutions are merely a way of valuing people. And so this topic of remote work, again, is really an issue of how are we going to value people in this changing environment? And I guess maybe we could just start here. Will remote work be the new norm? I mean, it I know that it just scares people. Like, could this actually be the new normal? Because can't we just get back to the way it used to be, the old normal? What do you think?
I'm kind of in the camp right now, Chris, where I firmly believe that either remote work or a form of remote work is definitely here to stay. I'm not saying that that's going to be applicable for all small and mid-sized companies out there, but for a lot, I think that we've had a major shift over the last couple of years to where there is a lot more. One is we've proven that we can be just as effective with the work we do and just as productive in remote locations as we can if we were working in the office. So I'm of the belief that from a leadership level that we've got to be ready to make that change or that transition to where we are figuring out a way to reposition our company so that we do and can work with our employees in remote situations as well as in hybrid models as well.
Yeah. I jotted down a couple words that you used because I want to come back to it. I think that um, probably, and this conversation will probably circle around a number of different topics, but what you threw in there was we know that people can be as productive and as effective in a remote environment. And so the logic would be, well, that means that we can go and keep doing remote work. But what I would say is that some of the leaders that I'm talking to are saying, okay, that's great. I'm glad we can be productive and effective, but I'm losing my culture. And what I really want to talk about today and zero in on is keeping culture remotely in this remote environment. How do we do this? And so, great. Glad we can be productive and effective. But Chuck, what are you seeing out there? How are people keeping their culture? And maybe we could just circle around this idea for a while.
I guess one of the first questions that I ask when I'm setting with the leadership teams right now, Chris, it really comes back to, tell me about the culture you had prior to the pandemic and how successful were you at really establishing that culture? What we've found is oftentimes they have a good description of what they think their culture was, but when it comes right down to it, they feel like that they still left a lot of room for improvement as far as how they could have made it better in 2018, 2019. So we fast forward to where we are today and we start looking at, to your point, to the remote work and how do we continue to develop a culture or extend our culture to those employees. And I think that one of the first things we have to be able to do is, we have to really become really clear and have clarity ultimately on what we want our culture to be today going forward. Because again, so much has changed over the last 2 years that when it comes to people, we're having to really reassess and revamp a lot of the policies and processes that we've used in the past. So when it comes to culture, what do we want it to look like and what changes do we need to make? So it comes back to, we've got to be really clear on it. And then we've got to come up with a system and a methodology on how we can consistently teach and keep the culture top of mind. So what kind of actions are important to our company that will really help provide clarity to our employees and to our vendors and to our customers that this is the culture of our organization?
Yeah. Okay. So let's take a step back because I guess one of my questions would be when you hear a leader say, I'm really worried that we're going to lose our culture. Do you think that they actually even know what they're saying? And we're going to speak in generalities today, not referring to any single leader that we've ever talked to, but what does a person mean when they say that?
I think that, oftentimes again, with my clients that I talk with, they're really, that when they think of culture, it's just about kind of how their employees interact, and really about what kind of environment they may have within the office. And I think those are really what's really core to them. And it's based on just kind of the attitude of their employees.
Hmm. Yeah, like the Gallup organization, they identify culture as just sort of the way we do things around here. Um, I I have this maybe concept, and I could be totally wrong, but I think that what that leader might really be saying is, I want it to go back to the way it was. And there seems to be maybe the ability to use culture as a synonym for the way I like things. Now, let me back up, because oftentimes it's the founder who establishes culture in the beginning, so it probably is the way they like things. But let's say that the leader gets used to seeing people in their seats on their computers, or meeting with people in their offices, and they're used to seeing people in their seats at 8:30 and people not in their seats after 5. And that becomes the routine that you see, and you start to measure productivity based on how much time somebody is in their seat. So now that becomes the culture. We have a great culture because everybody is in their seats doing work. And so now I want to go back to being able to monitor who's in their seat. Do you see that same concept, or have I just blown this completely out of proportion?
No, I think that's exactly, when you look at the way we've operated and we look at performance reviews and to measuring our culture, that's exactly what it comes back to, is people in the office, in their seats, from at the same starting time every day to the same time we all get up and go home. It's at the end of the day. And I think that our world's changed. I mean, again, it's changed so much, but I think we've used that same process and same measurement for decades. And the reality is, technology and the way that the world is actually operated has changed significantly just in the last 10 years. So my question to my clients is, why wouldn't we expect there to be changes in the way that we do business? And why wouldn't there be changes to the way that we are, to our culture, based on the way things have been impacted over the last 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, so maybe we need to help people understand the proper definition of culture, because if culture is, hey, we have a great culture because people come in, they sit in their seats, I can monitor them, therefore they are being productive. But now that I can't monitor them in their seats, I reject remote work. And so I guess maybe my question to you would be, if remote work is here to stay, we answered that question up front. How do we help leaders and organizations move to a new mentality around productivity that isn't measured by time in a seat, but is measured by something else? How are you helping clients with that?
So I think the change that we're having to see right now, and again, this is really almost on taking a very small step at a time, and almost in a beta test format, to really look at not just measuring people on the time that they spend, but how much productivity are they really doing? Because you can take two employees, give them exactly the same job, and one may take them 3 hours to do the project, another one may take 8. They're doing exactly the same work, but the result is happening much quicker with one. And I think the same thing is applicable when you're talking about this, somebody sitting in the office versus working remote. I think our measurements have got to, and our performance reviews have got to be focused more on the productivity and the result versus how much time it's taking.
Hmm. Well, we know that and we have a question too from Justin. But before we get there, we know that in the office, and I think the Gallup organization has done some research on this, and I've read a couple other resources, but people will waste a good portion of time during a workday by either surfing the internet or doing other activities. And this isn't an indictment on people. This is just more of a conversation about productivity, that just because someone's sitting in a seat doesn't mean they're productive. And what you're at least encouraging is if we could be more clear about expectations, due dates, specific tasks, what we expect from people, then I may not care whether they're in their seat the whole time or not. I don't actually even care when they do it. I just want them to accomplish the goals that we set forward. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And again, I think a lot of that comes back to the comfort level. Is it comes back to the communication and the setting of those expectations so that both parties are clear on what needs to be done and the timeline with which they have to get it done. And I think that's where we've got the disconnect in some situations, Chris, where there's almost a lack of trust in a lot of cases between leadership and an employee. Some even to the point where that happens within the office, but more so when it happens outside the office. I just had a business owner last week tell me, I'm not a fan of remote work. I don't trust my employees to do the work whenever it needs to be done. And I need for them to be available, from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon every day. And so we ended up working through an exercise where we actually brought some employees and some of their leadership together just to have some dialogue around that. They came away from the meeting with a completely different perspective just on what they heard during that conversation. So that's really another key piece to this whole culture and remote work is the level of communication and the amount of communication we're having.
Okay. About that specific example, who came away with greater clarity, the leaders or the employees?
The leaders actually came away with a lot more clarity. And they had never really sat down and had a conversation with their employees about this topic.
Mm.
And I see this almost on a weekly basis, Chris, where we've got essentially the two parties, employees and employers, having different perspectives, sitting almost in their own corners, but not willing to come together to collaborate and have open dialogue about what
Yeah.
they're thinking and how we can work together to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that brings up an interesting point, because what I keep hearing from leaders is some effect of this quote. Why is it that we, as business owners, keep having to adjust for employees? When are employees going to adjust for us? And there's kind of this mentality and a belief that owners are the ones that have to keep losing and employees are winning. It's a win-lose scenario. And I just happen to believe in dealing with people, and you just gave us a great example. When you put people together, you can actually create win-win scenarios. And I don't think employees are waking up in the morning going, man, can't wait to get to work today to really screw up, or can't wait to not meet my employer's expectations. Oftentimes it's a lack of clarity in those expectations, or it's a misunderstanding, or you mentioned it before, it's a belief system that needs to be broken through because that's what's affecting trust. How would you respond to that?
And again, I think the way that I would respond to it, Chris, when I think about, it comes back to the relationship between the two parties. And again, whether we're talking leadership to employee or whether we're just talking manager to the employee, our model has always been really as manager or leadership is one to the entire team. And I think what we've got to really be able to do is to bring this back to a one-to-one, to where as leaders to the employee, to get to know that individual employee, understand who they are and what makes them tick, and be able to really, be able to coach them and help for them to be able to bring the best version of themselves to work every day. Because I think that's what the employees are really wanting to do. They want to bring their best version. They want to be the most productive. They want to buy into the mission and the vision of the organization. And so I think that my thing is we've got to bring the leadership into that conversation. And another point to that is that when it comes to, for example, we are in the open enrollment time for benefits, and we've had a lot of my clients have told me, we're making changes. We're making changes based on what we think needs to be made. When I ask the question, have you surveyed your employees to get their perspective? No, we have not. And I see this as a pattern. And I think maybe this is what has always been for the last several decades. Leadership's making decisions without really getting other perspectives, from their managers and from their employees. So this all feeds back into the culture, into the trust and the communication right now.
Yeah.
And it's really, to me, it's really simple. We've got to just be able to have conversation, have dialogue.
All right, let me pull this back together again. We started with this idea that, okay, is remote work the real norm? But the question that's on everybody's minds is, how do I keep culture remotely? But that might be the question on the surface. It might go deeper, because the bigger issue or the deeper issue might be, I don't trust, or I have a belief system that this won't work, or that people won't work when they are remote. But we're saying, hey, what we've both seen is if you can bring employer and employee together to have a conversation, you actually begin to understand one another. You understand needs, motivations, desires, and it can actually the outcome is win-win.
Yes.
All right. So with that said, let's go back to this question that Justin asked, because what he asked was, what are your thoughts around companies trying shorter work weeks and the impact on culture and productivity? Do we see this becoming common in the future? So now we're moving beyond just even remote work, but what about shorter weeks? Are you seeing anyone do that right now?
I personally am not seeing, I don't have any clients, and all the conversations we're having with business owners right now, I'm not hearing anyone talking about going to a 4-day work week at this point.
Okay. But here's how I would answer the question. I have one client that has considered it, and what they were considering was extending the hours of the 4 days to get the same amount of work done, and the conversation still comes back down to productivity. So if there's an expectation of what needs to get done, and there's an expectation of what is needed from the employee, even in a remote environment, I'm not really too concerned with how you accomplish that. Now, if I need you on the phones for customer service, that's a different type of function. And so the expectation would be, I need you available between these hours. But I think the way we could leave this question is, as long as you are very clear about your expectations, about the measurements, and about what's expected of that employee, you can start experimenting with shorter work weeks, remote work, different hours, complete flexibility, a hybrid structure. But the point I think, Chuck, that you and I might make is, be clear about expectations. But before you even clarify expectations, have a conversation with your employees to find out what they really want, because we are really good at making assumptions. Anything you want to add to that?
There's not a lot more to add to it. I think that is, for me, that is the heart of the issue. And that's where we've got to start.
Okay, let's go to one last question, and we'll see where this leaves us. But what is the relationship between remote work and employee engagement? So culture being one thing, but Gallup, again, I've mentioned him a few times, but it's like Gallup has told us 2/3 of the workplace is not engaged in work. And globally, it's even less than that. Or I'm sorry, it's even more than that. It's 80%, 20% engaged in the workplace. So when I think about that, how does this remote work affect employee engagement?
Again, based off of studies that I've seen, Chris, and from conversations we've been having, the level of engagement is increased through remote work. I've seen several reports and studies that have shown that the level of engagement for remote workers is about 3 times what it is if you're sitting in the office. And I think that not only is that important, but then the other thing is from the quality of the work that's being done as well. is also significantly higher through remote work, as long as the communications that remote worker is getting, that they're having conversations with their manager on at least a weekly basis, and oftentimes multi times per week. If they're getting consistent feedback, the quality of the work goes up and they're more engaged. And the third component to that is that attrition is about 50% less with remote work than it is for those going into the office.
Hmm. Okay, so let's get highly practical for people. Again, this show was sort of keeping culture remotely. How do I engage employees? You've given us a few great ideas. The first is make sure you're having weekly conversations with people, engaging with them. As a result, you'll see their quality of work go up and you'll see retention go up.
Mhm.
Any other tips that you're suggesting or that you're hearing from businesses that have worked?
Yeah, I think a couple of other things on that, Chris, is the fact that the type of communications that managers are having with their employees, it's not just a matter of just checking in with them to measure how productivity is going, but it really is the different types of conversations. It comes back to having intentional dialogue about building relationships with those people that are working remote. It's also about checking in regularly with them. It's about measuring the productivity, but it's also about doing some coaching. And so, being able to have those different types of conversations throughout a month helps really keep them connected to the organization, and helps them, gives them other avenues to be able to connect with other people in different departments. So I think the two main concerns that I hear from leaders right now is that they're afraid their employees are going to feel isolated or they're going to feel lonely. And I think that those two feelings they're not the same. So if somebody's feeling isolated, to be able to engage with them through the more or I guess really more meetings, but also being able to use that to be able to connect them with a buddy system within the company helps take care of that feeling. If they're feeling lonely, it's about the quality of the communications and the quality of the relationships. So I think that's where, as a manager, we've got to be able to see that and be able to really be able to go deeper into that relationship with that employee to lift them up again, to be able to create the best version of them that they can be to be the most productive.
All right. I've been jotting some notes down. Uh, Keeping culture remotely and how we engage employees. First, engage them in conversation. Find out what they need, how they're doing. Find out personally how they're doing, what they need, how you can help them. Second, with that would be weekly conversations, checking in.
Mhm.
And in those conversations, don't just make it about productivity or making sure that they're hitting their numbers. Make it about coaching, make it about opportunities for growth, find out what's motivating them, find out what they need from you, find out how you can clear the pathway for them. Would you add anything else to those conversations, those one-on-ones?
No, I mean, and I think it comes back to the other thing that I would probably add into that, Chris, throughout those conversations is again, being able to find that one or two items each week that really focus back in on the actions that are needed for the culture, and really be able to spotlight those actions to those employees. Because again, I want to be able to keep the culture and keep those actions top of mind so that everybody is keeping that and we're able to keep that more effectively as we have conversations with other team members as well as with other clients.
Okay, I'm gonna add one other practical thing into that, and it's something that I'm been studying over the last couple of weeks. This idea of storytelling. And so one of the ways that you can keep your culture remotely is that from the top down in an organization, you're sharing stories of the behaviors and values that you want to see reproduced in the organization. And so even in these weekly conversations with teams, being able to share an example or a story of someone else or one of the other teams or a peer of yours, or even in that conversation, taking a story back and sharing it with the company. But I think in this remote environment, the use of stories and storytelling, even being able to record a story, is really helpful for keeping the culture in this remote environment. I think the other really practical thing you said was a buddy system. And, call it what you want, mentoring, buddy system, peer-to-peer, one-to-ones, whatever. But does everybody in the organization have a social support network? That a best friend at work, somebody that they can talk things through with. And maybe a topic for another show, Chuck, would be remote work and its effect on mental health and maybe emotional health. But we'll cover that later. Let me tie a bow on this and give you a chance to share anything else that's on your mind. We started this conversation by just saying, how do we keep culture in a remote environment? And we said, remote's here to stay. Some form of it is here to stay. We believe that. So how do we get leaders to change their thought processes, their beliefs about people, their beliefs about work, and begin trusting people? Well, the first step is to have conversations. The next step would be to set very clear expectations, put some standards in place, measurements, and then have regular conversations with people, weekly at least, where those conversations aren't just about holding people accountable to the standards, but learning about them personally, what they need, how they're feeling, how they're doing. Then connect them with a buddy in the organization. And then what I added was, I just think the use of storytelling is really powerful. Chuck, what else would you give to sort of send this conversation away, help people in this remote environment?
I think that's, we've hit on a lot of the really key components and the things that are really important, Chris. I think that, again, from a business owner and leadership perspective right now, it's really looking at your workforce and looking at the different generations. And again, as we have those conversations, as a baby boomer, I've got different needs than what a millennial or a Gen Z would have. And I think there's value that each generation brings to the workforce and to your organization. And it's about being able to understand the things that we can all bring in a positive way to really, again, create that one team, that one community where we are all working together toward one common vision, one common goal, and carry out the mission of your organization that you've set as a leader. And so I think those are things that we've really got to be focused on. The other thing that I would mention is we don't, as leaders, we don't have to do all of this alone and in a vacuum by ourselves. There are lots of resources that are out there. And if you don't have the resources, the last thing that I would mention is pull your leadership team together and create that community around you so that you've got almost your own board of directors or your own community where you can be vulnerable, you can be transparent with them and really get different perspectives on how you can move your organization forward.
Oh, man. Helpful. Thanks so much, Chuck. I think that when I was thinking through how I would sum this thing up, I would say, even as you try to figure out how to keep culture in a remote environment, as a leader, don't go at it alone. Don't just think about it by yourself. Engage in conversation with employees and other leadership team members. Engage in conversations with other CEOs and founders. And we'd be happy to be a resource to many of you. But assumptions can make all of us crazy. And so don't assume, get into a conversation, find out what people need. But I think that this was a really helpful, probably start of a conversation, Chuck. I think we probably need to continue this. There'll be more questions in the future, but I appreciate you joining me today for just a brief conversation about remote work. We've kicked it off. I think we need to continue it.
I look forward to it. I think it's a great topic.
All right. That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Always About People show. We hope that you'll join us in the future. Obviously, you can like and subscribe on YouTube, on Facebook. Go ahead and sign up to get the reminders for when this show will happen next. We're attempting to do these weekly, bringing in different guests on topics that you want to hear about. Let us know if there's a topic you want addressed in one of these episodes, we'd love to cover it. Appreciate you being with us. Until next time.